My name is Natalie Brooks. I'm 28, and at 7:42 on a Tuesday morning, standing in the parking lot of a Fort Campbell administrative building, with red clay dust still on my boots from the previous week's field exercise, I found out my family had sold my grandmother's lake house for $450,000 while I was 11 time zones away, and not one of them had said a single word to me about it. Not one word. The call came from a Texas number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. I had a logistics brief in 18 minutes and a stack of movement orders on my desk that needed signatures before noon. But something, some instinct I still can't explain, made me swipe right. "Is this Natalie Brooks?" The woman's voice was clipped, professional. "Speaking." "Ms. Brooks, this is Linda Marsh from Travis County Property Records. We've been trying to reach you regarding a title transfer filed on the property at 4817 Lakeview Crest Drive, Lago Vista, Texas. The sale closed on March 3rd. We need to verify your signature on the power of attorney document on file." I remember the way the morning went very still around me. A mockingbird was screaming from a pine tree at the edge of the lot. Somewhere behind me, two soldiers were arguing about something. I couldn't hear the words, only the rhythm of their voices. The sun was already sharp and hot on the back of my neck. "I'm sorry," I said. "Can you repeat that?" She repeated it. The property address, the sale date, the closing price, $450,000. The buyer, a real estate investment group out of Austin. The power of attorney on file, signed by Natalie Marie Brooks, notarized February 18th. I had been at Forward Operating Base Taji on February 18th. I had been inventorying ammunition crates and signing off on helicopter fuel manifests. I had not been in Texas. I had not signed anything. "Ms. Marsh," I said, and I was surprised by how steady my voice came out. "I need you to hold that document. Do not process anything further. I'm going to call you back within the hour." I hung up. I stood in that parking lot for exactly 3 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on my phone. And I breathed. Then I called my father. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, sweetheart." Casual. Easy. Like it was any other Tuesday. "Dad?" I kept my voice flat. "Tell me about the lake house." A pause. 3 seconds. Maybe 4. "Where'd you hear about that?" "Travis County Property Records called me. They want to verify my signature on the power of attorney, the one I never signed." Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, the warmth was gone. Something harder came through, something I had heard before but never quite recognized for what it was until that moment. "Natalie, we need to talk about this in person. This isn't a phone conversation." "You sold Grandma Evie's lake house, Dad. The one she left to me. You forged my signature and sold it while I was deployed, and you want to talk about it in person?" It was the right thing to do for the family. The words came out smooth and practiced, like he'd rehearsed them, like he'd been waiting for this call and had decided in advance exactly what he would say. "Sophia needed capital for the restaurant. We all talked about it. You just weren't available to—" "I wasn't available?" My voice cracked on the last word. "Just once. I hated myself for it. I was in a combat support zone, Dad. I wasn't on vacation. And even if I was, she left it to me. It was mine. You had no right. You were never here." His voice changed again, sharper now. The warmth and the practiced calm both gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like contempt. "Evie left it to you because you were her favorite, and we all had to just accept that. But you've been gone for 2 years, Natalie. You don't come home for Christmas, you don't call your mother, you don't— Don't you dare make this about my deployments." My hands were shaking. I pressed my palm flat against the hood of the nearest vehicle, hot metal grounding me. "Don't you dare. You forged my signature. That's a crime. That's a federal crime because I'm an active duty service member, and that property was covered under the Service Members Civil Relief Act. And I want you to know right now that I have documented everything about this deployment, every day, every order, every location, and I will use all of it." Natalie, I'll be home in 6 weeks. And when I get there, this conversation is going to continue somewhere with a judge in it. I hung up. I sat down on the curb of that parking lot, the clay-red dust settling around my boots, and I did not cry. I wanted to. My eyes burned. My throat was so tight it was hard to swallow. But I had been trained for a long time to manage the distance between feeling something and letting it pull you under. I breathed in through my nose, out through my mouth, and I counted backwards from 20. By the time I reached 1, I had already started building a list in my head. Evidence. I was going to need evidence. And I was very, very good at documentation. Before I go on, if stories about standing up for yourself mean something to you, about refusing to be erased by the people who are supposed to protect you, please hit like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now and what time is it there. I want to know you're out there. Let me take you back 22 years, to a summer when I was 6 years old and the lake house was the whole world. Grandma Evie's lake house sat on the eastern cove of Lake Travis, tucked back from the main water line by about 40 yards of cedar and live oak. The dock was warped in 2 places, and the steps down to the water were never quite level, but none of that mattered because in the mornings, when the mist was still sitting on the surface and the herons were moving slow and serious through the shallows, it was the most beautiful place I had ever seen. Evie Mae Brooks, Grandma Evie to everyone who loved her, which was a wide and varied category of people, had owned that house since 1974. She smelled like lavender soap and cedar chips, and sometimes, faintly, of the vanilla extract she kept in a glass bottle on the kitchen windowsill and added to everything: oatmeal, cornbread, coffee, lemonade. She had hands like warm geography, all ridges and soft valleys, and when she held mine walking down to the dock in the mornings, I felt absolutely certain that nothing bad would ever happen. She taught me to fish that summer. We sat on the warped dock at 5:30 a.m., before anyone else was awake, wrapped in quilts she'd pulled from the cedar chest in the back bedroom. She'd hand me a plastic cup of warm milk with a splash of vanilla in it, the same cup every time, blue enamel with a chip on the rim, and she'd say, "Now we wait, Natalie Bird, now we watch." I was not a patient child. I wanted to talk, to ask questions, to know what was going to happen before it happened. Evie let me talk for a while, answered my questions in her unhurried way. And then, when I finally ran out of words, she would sit in silence with me and let the morning arrive on its own schedule. "You're a planner," she told me once that summer, watching me reorganize the tackle box by size and color at 6 a.m. "You're going to drive some people crazy with it, but one day it's going to save you something." She touched the top of my head, just briefly. "You remember that, Natalie Bird. The people who document things are the ones who can prove what happened." I was 6. I didn't know what she meant. But I remembered it. I remembered it with complete clarity, 22 years later, standing in that parking lot in Fort Campbell, hand flat on hot metal, building my list. The lake house was hers, and she made sure of it. She had it in her will before I was born, and she updated the will twice. Once when I was 12, once when I was 22, and freshly commissioned as a second lieutenant. The second update came with a phone call, her voice steady and quiet, the way it was when she was saying something she needed me to hear. "I'm leaving you the house, Natalie Bird. Not the family, you. I know your father, I know what he'll try. So I'm leaving you a few other things along with it, things that will speak for themselves." I didn't ask her what she meant. I should have asked. But she died 18 months ago, on a Tuesday in October, of a stroke that happened in her sleep. She was 81 years old. She went quietly, without drama, the way she'd always lived. I got emergency leave and flew home for the funeral in my dress blues, and I held my mother's hand in the church pew, while my father looked at the casket with an expression I couldn't quite read. And Sophia cried in a photogenic and practiced way, and somewhere in the back of the church, a woman I didn't recognize was watching our family with quiet, careful eyes. I didn't know then that her name was Dorothy Vance, or that she was Evie's attorney, or that she had been watching and waiting for over 8 years. The first time I heard what my father had done, truly heard it, not just as a county records bureaucrat describing a transaction, but as a lived, sourced, documented reality, was 6 weeks after that parking lot phone call. I was home on leave, 22 days of it, staying in my childhood bedroom in my parents' Austin house because I had not yet processed what it would mean to stay there, and I had not yet been ready to do anything else. My father and I had not spoken since the call. My mother had texted twice, "Looking forward to seeing you, sweetheart," and "Sophia made your favorite," as though nothing had happened, as though the earth had not shifted 3 degrees on its axis and changed the way every member of this family would relate to me forever. I arrived on a Sunday evening. Sophia was there, which I had been expecting. She was wearing a new silk blouse, deep green, and her hair was done, and she smelled expensive. She had always been beautiful, and she had always known it, and she had always, in ways I couldn't quite prove and couldn't quite ignore, used it. "Nat!" She hugged me before I was ready for it, pressing her cheek against mine. "It's so good to have you home. You look tired, babe." "Long flight," I said. My mother emerged from the kitchen with the expression she always wore when she knew a hard conversation was coming and had decided to preempt it with food. "Dinner's ready. Brisket. I know it's your favorite." My father was standing at the kitchen island, drink in hand, watching me. He looked the same as always. Wide shoulders, thick silver hair, the kind of face that projects authority so effortlessly that people assume it's earned. He had been a bank manager for 21 years. He had a voice calibrated for reassurance and a handshake that still made other men straighten up. He looked at me across the kitchen and he said, very calmly, "Good to have you home, Natalie." Not sweetheart. Natalie. I noticed. We ate dinner. My mother talked about the neighborhood association and a new coffee shop that had opened 2 blocks away. Sophia talked about the restaurant, her restaurant, the one that bore my grandmother's memory in its name and my grandmother's money in its walls, with a kind of glowing, proprietary pride that made something in my stomach clench. Graham's table had opened 3 months prior. She showed me the Instagram page. Warm wood surfaces, locally sourced menus, a logo that used a cursive script that looked almost like Evie's handwriting, 200 posts, 4,000 followers. A review in the Austin Chronicle calling it soulful, earnest, farm to table done right. $450,000 had built that. "Sophia," I said, setting down my fork, "did you know where the startup capital came from?" The table went quiet. My mother's hand went very still on her water glass. Sophia looked at me with wide, clear eyes, that face she had been making since we were children, the face that said, "I don't know what you're talking about, and I don't want to be part of whatever this is," and said, "Dad handled all of that. But you knew it came from the lake house." "Natalie." My father's voice from the other end of the table, low, warning. It was the right thing to do for the family. Those words again, smooth and prepared, like something he'd written down and memorized. Sophia had a real opportunity. The money was sitting in a property none of us were using. You weren't here to consult. "I was deployed," I said. "You know how to reach me when I'm deployed. You've done it before. Mom called me when the refrigerator broke, Dad. You called me when the dog died. But you didn't call me before you sold my grandmother's house." "Our grandmother," Sophia said quietly. I turned to look at her. "She left it to me, Sophia. Specifically to me. It's in the will. It's in the hum. You know it's in the will." "She was old," Sophia said, and her voice had shifted, not unkind, but certain, the voice of someone who had already talked themselves into a version of events and settled there. "She didn't always understand." "She was perfectly competent," I said. "She updated that will twice, the last time 2 years before she died. Her neighbor, Dorothy Harper, sat with her through both signings. Her attorney witnessed her mental state for years. There is nothing ambiguous about what Grandma Evie intended. Natalie. My father again, harder now. You're making this ugly when it doesn't have to be. You forged my signature, I said. You had someone fraudulently notarize a document in my name. I was in Iraq. I have documentation of every day I was there. And I want you to know I've already been in contact with a real estate attorney, and I know my rights under the Service Members Civil Relief Act, and I know what the penalties are for what you did. The silence that followed was different from the silence before. It had weight in it. My mother was looking at her plate. Sophia was looking at the table. My father was looking at me, and his expression, for just a moment, just one flash, showed something I had never seen on him before. Not guilt, exactly, but something adjacent to it. Recognition. The recognition of a man who had done the math and arrived at an answer he didn't like. Then it was gone. You should speak to a lawyer before making accusations, he said. Family matters in court get very messy, very fast. It was the right thing to do for the family, he said. Third time. I heard it the third time the way you hear something in a completely new key. I pushed back my chair, picked up my plate, carried it to the sink, and rinsed it. I dried my hands on the dish towel hanging from the oven handle. I turned around. My father was still sitting at the table, drink in hand, watching me with that carved stone expression. I'll see you in court, Dad, I said. I mean that literally. I picked up my bag from the hallway and I drove to a Holiday Inn on the service road, and I sat on the edge of the bed for 45 minutes in the dark before I turned on the light and opened my laptop. I had a lot of work to do. Fort Campbell had made me thorough. The Army, for all its weight and its complications, had given me one skill that served me better than any other in the months that followed. The knowledge that paper trails are everything, that the difference between a claim and a fact is documentation, that evidence doesn't have feelings, doesn't have family loyalty, doesn't have a stake in anyone's comfort. Evidence just is. I had been keeping a deployment log since my first tour at 23, dates, locations, activities, personnel. Not because regulations required it, though some of it did, but because I was 6 years old reorganizing a tackle box, and I was wired that way. I had movement orders, helicopter manifests, fuel logs, field exercise reports, unit formation records, badge swipe data from the FOB gates, emails time-stamped from overseas IP addresses, and photographs I had taken and uploaded to a secured personal drive dating back 3 years. On February 18th, the date on the fraudulent notarization, I had been at Phobe Taji. I had a photograph of myself at 0613 hours, taken by Sergeant First Class Dominic Reyes during a morning accountability formation, standing in front of a prefabricated building in full kit with 6 other soldiers. The geotag on the photo placed us 47 miles north of Baghdad. I had a signed movement order for a logistics convoy that day. I had my name on a fuel manifest for 3 vehicles. I had 3 witness statements, collected in the weeks after the parking lot call, from soldiers who remembered that day, because we'd had a near miss with a vehicle IED on the return leg and had spent 2 hours waiting in a holding position. I had been in Iraq. I had never touched that power of attorney. But I needed more than my alibi. I needed the chain, from the forgery to the notarization, to the sale, to the bank transfer, to Sophia's account, to the restaurant. That took the better part of 4 months. My attorney, a woman named Patricia Holt, who worked out of an office on Lamar Boulevard and had a reputation in Austin real estate fraud litigation that preceded her considerably, helped me pull the public records and map the money. The Lakehouse had sold to an investment group called Crestline Acquisitions, LLC, for $450,000 on March 3rd. The proceeds had been wired to a personal account held by Thomas E. Brooks at Meridian Trust Bank within 72 hours of closing. 15 days later, $230,000 had been transferred to Sophia M. Brooks. The remaining $220,000 had followed in 2 tranches over the next 6 weeks. The notary who had stamped the fraudulent power of attorney was a man named Gerald Oates. He had been a branch manager at the same bank where my father had worked for 11 years. They had played golf together. They had attended each other's retirement parties. Gerald Oates had been a notary for 23 years and had never had a complaint filed against him. He was 71 years old and had a Christmas card on his mantle every year from Thomas Brooks. Patricia subpoenaed his notary log. February 18th was blank. No entry. No record of a notarization performed, which meant either Gerald Oates had failed to log a legitimate transaction, possible, technically, or he had signed and stamped a document he had never witnessed in person. Patricia forwarded the discrepancy to the Travis County District Attorney's Office. They opened an inquiry. All of this was happening quietly, carefully, the way Evie had taught me to fish, without announcing yourself, without disturbing the surface, just watching and waiting. My father didn't know any of it. He had moved on. The lake house was sold, the money was distributed, Grams's table was open and thriving, and Natalie was just being difficult again, the way she always was, the way she had been since she was 12 and started keeping a journal and asking inconvenient questions at Thanksgiving. She'd calm down. She always did. She was 11 time zones away most of the time, and she didn't have the resources to fight a real estate transaction in Texas civil court on an Army captain's salary. He was very wrong about that last part, but he didn't know it yet. I need to tell you about the day I ran into Sophia at the restaurant, because it matters for understanding what was at stake. It was a Thursday in November, 4 months after I'd come home and moved into a one-bedroom apartment on Riverside Drive. I had chosen the apartment partly because it was affordable and partly because it was far enough from my parents' house that I would not run into family by accident, but not so far that I couldn't get to Patricia's office in 15 minutes. I was working the 6 a.m. to noon slot at the Army Reserve Center 3 days a week, processing logistics documentation for a National Guard unit preparing for deployment, which was both practical and, in a dark way I refused to examine closely, somewhat poetic. I had not intended to go to Graham's table. I walked past it on the way to the coffee shop next door, which had better pastries and considerably fewer associations. But Sophia was standing at the host stand just inside the open front door, laughing at something her manager had said, and she saw me before I could redirect. "Nat!" She stepped out onto the sidewalk. Her apron was clean. The restaurant was beautiful. Warm light, exposed brick, small vases of dried wildflowers on each table. It was, I had to admit, well designed. It looked like something Evie would have loved. That was the detail that cut deepest. They had taken Evie's money and made something she would have been proud of, and they had just not included me in any part of it. "Sophia," I said, "I didn't know you were in the neighborhood." She reached for my arm and I stepped back slightly, not dramatically, just enough. She noticed. Her hand dropped. "How's the apartment?" "Fine. Dad said you hired a lawyer." "I did." "Nat." Her voice dropped. She glanced toward the door where her manager had quietly retreated. "This is going to hurt everyone. Can't I just what?" I asked. My voice was level. I had practiced this, not deliberately, but by habit. The Army taught you to save your emotional responses for when they were useful, and standing on a sidewalk in front of a restaurant built with stolen money was not a useful moment for emotion. Except that my grandmother's last gift to me was taken without my knowledge or consent? Except that someone forged my signature on a federal document? Except that you used the proceeds to build your dream while I was in a combat zone and didn't even send me a text? It's not... She stopped. Tried again. "Dad said you were going to be reimbursed, eventually, when the restaurant turned a profit." I looked at her. I looked at her for a long time. Sophia had always been the daughter who stayed. The one who came to Sunday dinners and called Mom twice a week and showed up at Dad's golf tournaments and filled the roles I had vacated when I joined the Army at 22. I had never resented her for that. I understood it, the way people slot into the shapes available to them. But I was looking at her now on this sidewalk, and I was understanding, for the first time and completely, that she had known. She had known before the papers were filed. She had known before the sale closed. She had known when I called from that parking lot in Fort Campbell, and she had sat across from me at that dinner table eating brisket and talking about her Instagram following. She had known, and she had chosen the restaurant. The reimbursement plan, I said. Is that in writing? She blinked. I don't. Dad handled. Is it in writing, Sophia? She said nothing. That's what I thought, I said. I stepped around her. Tell your staff the food smells good. I went to the coffee shop next door, and I sat at a corner table, and I ordered an Americano, and I opened my laptop and I wrote Patricia a 2-line email. No reimbursement arrangement in writing. Sophia was aware prior to sale. Please proceed. Patricia wrote back in 11 minutes. Understood. The hearing date is set. January 14th, 10 a.m. Travis County Courthouse, Courtroom 7. Be there early. The package arrived 9 days before the hearing. I was not expecting it. I had not been expecting anything. Patricia had her documents. I had my alibi evidence. The county had Gerald Oates's notary log, and I had thought, naively, that the case was already as complete as it was going to get. I was at my apartment on a Wednesday afternoon, working through movement order templates for the National Guard unit, when the knock came. The woman at my door was in her mid-60s, gray-haired, wearing a wool blazer and reading glasses pushed up on her head. She was holding a flat cardboard package, the kind that comes from a document storage service, sealed with tamper-evident tape and addressed in handwriting I recognized immediately and completely. Evelyn Evie Mae Brooks. My grandmother's handwriting, in the blue ink she always used, in the deliberate, careful print she switched to when something was important. Miss Brooks? The woman put out her hand. Dorothy Vance. I was your grandmother's attorney. My throat closed. I shook her hand. May I come in? I stepped back and let her in. She sat in the one good chair I owned, and I sat on the edge of the bed. I had not finished furnishing the apartment. There was nowhere else. And she explained. Evie had come to Dorothy Vance 8 years ago, shortly after the first will update. She had been, Dorothy said, one of the most lucid and purposeful clients she had ever worked with. She had updated her estate documents twice in 8 years. She had also prepared a sealed package, this package, and given Dorothy specific instructions. Do not deliver this until after the legal proceedings begin. Not before. If Natalie doesn't file suit, deliver it on the 2nd anniversary of my death. If she does file, deliver it 1 week before the first hearing. Patricia had filed the civil fraud complaint in October. The hearing was January 14th. Dorothy had been waiting. She also wanted me to tell you something, Dorothy said. She looked at me with the clear, direct gaze of someone delivering a message they have been holding for a long time. She said, Tell Natalie Bird that I planted the seeds 8 years ago. I just had to trust her to do the watering. I put my hand over my mouth. I sat on the edge of my bed in that half-furnished apartment, and I held my breath for a full 10 seconds, and I did not cry, but it was the closest I had come. Dorothy left after 45 minutes, having answered my questions and outlined what the package contained in general terms. I walked her to the door. I locked the deadbolt. I sat back down on the bed with the package on my lap, and I did not open it immediately. I sat with it for a while, the way Evie had taught me to sit on that dock in the mornings, waiting for the right moment to arrive on its own. Then I opened it. Inside was a single sealed envelope, cream-colored, with my name on the front in that deliberate blue ink. I opened it carefully. 3 pages of handwriting, dense but clear. I started reading. Dear Natalie Bird, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and your father has already done what I knew he would do. I want you to know that I am not surprised, and more importantly, I need you to know that I prepared for it. Thomas doesn't hear reason. He hears documents. So I left him documents he can't argue with. Do you remember the summer you were 6, and you reorganized my tackle box at 5 in the morning? You told me every lure had a right place. I told you that the people who document things are the ones who can prove what happened. I meant it then. I mean it now. You were always the one who paid attention, Natalie Bird. That's why I trusted this to you. The original executed will, deed of trust, and property title, all naming you as sole heir to 4817 Lakeview Crest Drive, are held by Dorothy Vance at Vance Estate Law, 3114 Shoal Creek Boulevard, Austin, Texas, 78722. Dorothy has been holding them sealed since 2016. She will deliver them when the time is right. She knows what to do. Inside this envelope, you will also find a certified copy of my will, executed November 2014 and updated March 2016, with both signatures notarized by a party unconnected to your father. A letter from my personal physician, Dr. Adaora Nweki, confirming my mental competence at both signing dates. A notarized statement from my neighbor Evelyn Harper, who was present during the March 2016 update, and heard me state clearly that Thomas would attempt to transfer the property and that my intention was for you to have it permanently. 8 years of bank statements from the account your father does not know I had, showing the $43,000 I set aside to cover your legal costs if it came to this. You are not absent. You are not selfish. You are not the difficult one. You are the one who showed up, even when showing up required flying to a war zone. I have always known that. I should have said it more. The money in the account is yours. Use it wisely. Use it to come home when this is over. All my love, always and entirely, your Grandma Evie May. Now we wait, Natalie Bird. Now we watch. I read it twice, then a third time. Then I sat on my bed in the quiet of that apartment for a long time. The $43,000 account was at Meridian Trust, branch on South Congress Avenue. Dorothy had the access documentation. The money was already there, had been there for 8 years, earning interest, sitting dormant and ready. $43,000. Enough for every legal fee Patricia had billed and then some. Enough to cover the hearing, the forensic handwriting analysis, the document expert, the travel costs. My grandmother had been planning this for 8 years. She had seen it coming 8 years before it happened, and she had built a counter-move into her estate documents with the quiet, unhurried patience of a woman who had been sitting on a warped dock at 5:30 a.m., watching for herons since before I was born. The people who document things are the ones who can prove what happened. I called Patricia at 7 p.m. She left a legal fund, I said, 43,000. Dorothy Vance has the account access. She also left witness documentation from her neighbor and a physician's competency letter covering both. Will updates. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Natalie, she said, your grandmother was remarkable. Yes, I said. She was. I'll call Dorothy in the morning. We're going to be very ready. January 14th came cold and clear, the way Texas winter mornings sometimes do. Sky a hard, bright blue, air carrying a chill that felt imported from somewhere more serious. I was at the Travis County Courthouse at 8:47 a.m., 13 minutes before it opened, wearing my army dress uniform. Patricia had asked whether I wanted to wear civilian clothes. I had thought about it for approximately 4 seconds and decided no. Let the record reflect who I am and where I was when this happened. The courtroom was small and procedurally arranged. 2 counsel tables, the bench, a gallery of wooden pews that could seat about 60. By 9:45, when the bailiff called for order, there were approximately 40 people in that gallery. Some I recognized. Evelyn Harper, my grandmother's neighbor, 80 years old and straight-backed in a navy blazer. 2 of my parents' longtime friends, Roger and Patricia Klein, who had known our family for 20 years. A journalist from the Travis County Tribune who covered civil court proceedings. Several people I didn't recognize, relatives on the periphery of my family, acquaintances of my parents, curious onlookers. My father sat at the defense table in a charcoal suit that cost more than my monthly rent. My mother sat directly behind him in the gallery, her posture composed, but her hands working in her lap, folding and refolding the strap of her purse. Sophia was 3 seats down from my mother, not beside her. I noticed that distance immediately, wearing a burgundy dress and not looking at me. Gerald Oates was not there. He had, the previous month, surrendered his notary commission and entered a cooperation agreement with the district attorney's office. He would testify in the criminal proceeding if it reached that point. His attorney had filed a separate statement for the civil record. My father's attorney was a man named Frank Alderson. Silver-haired, authoritative, the kind of lawyer my father had hired because he looked exactly like my father and presumably spoke the same language. He made his opening statement with practiced confidence, arguing that the power of attorney had been executed legitimately, that my signature had been obtained via a process my father believed to be valid, and that the family had acted in the genuine belief that the property was being managed appropriately in my absence. Patricia made her opening statement in 11 minutes. She was not silver-haired, and she was not authoritative in the declarative way Frank Alderson was. She was precise. She used numbers. She used dates. She said, "My client, Captain Natalie Brooks, will demonstrate through military deployment records, forensic handwriting analysis, notary commission records, bank transfer documentation, and a statement from the deceased property owner's attorney that no valid power of attorney was ever signed by Captain Brooks, that the document on file with Travis County property records bears a forged signature, and that the proceeds from the fraudulent sale of the property were transferred to and used by the defendants." She paused. She looked at the gallery, then at the bench. "We ask the court to order full restitution of $535,000, representing the $450,000 sale price, plus 18 months of interest and damages under the Texas Theft Liability Act." My father's jaw tightened. The first crack in the composed surface. Judge Marianne Hollis, small, 50s, reading glasses on a chain around her neck, looked at the paperwork in front of her with an expression of complete professionalism. "Counsel, you may proceed." Patricia called me first. I walked to the stand, was sworn in, sat down. The room was very quiet. I could feel 40 pairs of eyes on me. My father was watching from the defense table with the expression he wore when he was calculating, assessing, determining how much of a problem something was going to be. Patricia walked me through it methodically. My deployment timeline, the movement orders from FOB Taji for February 18th, the photographs with geotags, the signed fuel manifests, Sergeant First Class Dominic Reyes's witness statement, submitted in writing, confirming my presence at formation that morning, the badge swipe records from the FOB gate showing my entry and exit times, the email timestamps from my military account, which placed my IP address in the network range of the FOB from February 14th through March 1st. She then presented the forensic handwriting analysis. Patricia had engaged Dr. Lorena Castillo, a certified forensic document examiner with 26 years of experience. Dr. Castillo had compared the signature on the power of attorney to 18 verified samples of my handwriting collected from official documents over 6 years. Her conclusion: the signature on the power of attorney was not mine. The pen pressure was inconsistent. The letter formation differed in 7 measurable ways, and 2 letters, my characteristic capital N and final lowercase s, showed patterns that did not match a single verified sample. She submitted the county assessor records. She submitted the bank transfer records showing the $450,000 wired from Crestline Acquisitions to Thomas E. Brooks within 72 hours of closing. She submitted the subsequent transfers from Thomas E. Brooks to Sophia M. Brooks, totaling $450,000 across 3 tranches. She submitted the Instagram records from Grams's Tables opening, photographs my sister had posted on the restaurant's public page dated March through May of the following year, with captions describing the generous family investment that had made the opening possible. She submitted Dorothy Vance's affidavit, the original will and deed, and Dr. Adiora Nweki's physician statement confirming my grandmother's full competence at both signing dates. She submitted Evelyn Harper's written testimony, And then she called Evelyn Harper to the stand in person. Evelyn Harper was 80 years old. She had lived next door to my grandmother for 31 years. She walked to the stand slowly but without hesitation, declined the offer of a chair, and stood with her hands folded on the railing. She testified that she had been present at the March 2016 will update, that Evie Mae Brooks had been, in her words, sharp as a tack and twice as deliberate. That Evie had looked her in the eye after signing and said, "Evelyn, if Thomas tries to take this house from Natalie after I'm gone, I need you to be willing to tell someone what you saw today." That Evelyn had said yes, that she had been waiting ever since. She knew, Evelyn Harper told the courtroom. She knew what was coming. She just wanted to make sure Natalie would have someone who could stand up and say what happened. The gallery was absolutely quiet. My father had been composed through most of the morning. He had been making notes on a legal pad, conferring in low tones with Frank Alderson, maintaining the posture of a man who was inconvenienced but not concerned. But I watched him through the proceedings the way I had learned to watch things that mattered, steadily, without expression, from a position where I could see everything. When Evelyn Harper stepped down, I watched his hand stop moving on the legal pad. Frank Alderson's cross-examination was measured and professional, but he was working against a record that had been 8 years in the making and an alibi documented across 3 continents. He challenged the handwriting analysis on methodology. Patricia had Dr. Castillo's credentials and peer-reviewed methodology on file. He challenged the deployment records as incomplete. Patricia had 3 independent witnesses and a geolocation photograph. He challenged Dorothy Vance's affidavit on procedural grounds. Judge Hollis sustained 1 minor objection and overruled 6 others. Then it was my father's turn on the stand. Frank Alderson kept it brief and controlled. My father testified that he had believed the power of attorney to be legitimate, that he had relied on Gerald Oates as a trusted and experienced notary, and that he had acted in the family's best interest with the resources available at the time. He was calm. He was articulate. He was, as he had always been, completely convincing if you didn't know what was in the paper in front of him. Patricia stood up for cross-examination, and she was quiet for a moment before she spoke. She had a particular way of pausing before a significant question, not for effect, I had learned, but because she was precise, and she wanted to make sure the question was exactly right. "Mr. Brooks," she said, "on February 18th of last year, where were you?" "I was at home," he said, "in Austin." "And Gerald Oates, were you in contact with him on or around that date?" My father's attorney objected. "Calls for speculation." Judge Hollis overruled it. "You may answer," she said. "Gerald and I are longtime friends," my father said. "We were in contact regularly." "Were you in contact with him on February 18th, specifically regarding a notarization?" A pause. "I don't recall the specific date." "Mr. Brooks, your daughter was serving as a logistics officer in Iraq on February 18th. She has provided military deployment records, geolocation evidence, and 3 witness statements confirming her presence there. Gerald Oates' notary log has no entry for that date. His cooperation agreement with the Travis County DA's office indicates he did not physically witness your daughter sign any document. Given all of that, can you explain how a notarized power of attorney bearing your daughter's signature came to exist?" The courtroom was very still. My father looked at Patricia. He looked at the gallery. He looked at me briefly, and I held his gaze. Then he looked at Frank Alderson, and Frank Alderson gave him the smallest shake of his head. "Don't." My father looked back at Patricia, and then he said the thing he shouldn't have said. The thing he had said 3 times in the last 8 months, smooth and prepared, in every conversation and every silence. The phrase that had become his explanation and his defense and his identity in this entire affair. It was the right thing to do for the family. The silence that followed was different from any silence I had ever sat in. It was the silence of 40 people processing an answer that was not a defense. Judge Hollis looked at him over her reading glasses. "Mr. Brooks," she said, "that is not responsive to the question." It was Mr. Brooks. Her voice was not unkind, but it was final. You have been presented with forensic handwriting analysis, military deployment records, notary commission documentation, bank transfer records, a physician's competency letter, and 2 eyewitness accounts of the property owner's intent. Your response to a direct question about the origin of a fraudulently notarized document is to invoke family interest. I want to make sure you understand the weight of what you're being asked. She let that sit for a moment. Then she returned to her paperwork. Patricia rested. Frank Alderson attempted a brief redirect that did not substantially alter what had already been established. Judge Hollis called a 15-minute recess. When she returned, she did not take long. This court finds that the power of attorney document filed with Travis County Property Records on February 18th of last year was not executed by Natalie Marie Brooks, and that the signature affixed to that document is a forgery. This court further finds that the notarization of said document by Gerald Oates was fraudulently performed, as evidenced by the absence of any contemporaneous notary log entry and Mr. Oates' cooperation agreement with the district attorney's office. The sale of the property at 4817 Lakeview Crest Drive, Lago Vista, Texas, conducted on the basis of that fraudulent power of attorney, is hereby voided. Thomas Eugene Brooks is ordered to pay restitution to Natalie Marie Brooks in the amount of $535,000, representing the $450,000 sale proceeds plus assessed damages under the Texas Theft Liability Act. She set down her papers. This matter is referred to the Travis County District Attorney's Office for criminal review. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down. My father did not stand up immediately. He sat at that defense table in his charcoal suit, and he seemed to fold inward, not dramatically, not the way a scene like that plays out in movies, but slowly and quietly, the way a structure settles when the load-bearing element is removed. He put one hand on the table, and I watched his shoulders go down. Frank Alderson put a hand on his arm and said something quietly. My father shook his head. In the gallery, Roger Klein, who had known my father for 20 years, who had attended every one of his retirement parties, who had golfed with him and toasted him at celebrations, stood up and put his hand on his wife's back and guided her toward the aisle without looking back. I heard someone behind me say, very quietly, all this time. I did not look back. I had promised myself I would not look back for a reaction. The reaction was not mine to collect. I stood up from the plaintiff's table. I picked up the folder Patricia had assembled, all the documents, neatly organized in the order we'd presented them, Evie's letter on top. I walked out of that courtroom with Patricia beside me, and in the hallway, under the fluorescent lights of the Travis County Courthouse, I stopped, and I stood very still for about 10 seconds. Patricia did not say anything. She was good at silences. Thank you, I said finally. Your grandmother did most of the work, she said. The criminal investigation took 7 months. Gerald Oates pled guilty to fraudulent notarization and fraud upon a military service member and received 2 years probation and the permanent revocation of his notary commission. My father pled no contest to real estate fraud and theft from a military service member. He received a suspended sentence, 3 years probation, the $535,000 restitution order, and a permanent order barring him from serving as an executor or trustee for any estate in the state of Texas. Graham's table closed 5 months after the hearing. Sophia had attempted to refinance the business independently, but the civil judgment had attached to her assets as a knowing recipient of fraudulent funds. She contested it briefly, then didn't. I heard from Patricia that Sophia had relocated to Nashville to work in restaurant consulting. I did not reach out. I wasn't ready for that conversation, and possibly I never would be. My mother called me 3 times in the months after the hearing. The first time I let it go to voicemail. The second time I answered and listened to 8 minutes of her voice breaking around the edges of sentences she couldn't quite complete. I told her I needed time, and I meant it. The third time, we had a short, careful conversation that ended with her saying she was sorry, and me saying I heard her, and neither of us saying anything more than that. It was not resolution. It was a beginning of something, maybe. I wasn't ready to name it. 6 weeks after the hearing, on a cold Saturday in February, I drove out to Lake Travis. The property was still technically in the name of Crestline Acquisitions, LLC. Pending the outcome of the civil judgment's property restitution phase, Patricia had filed to void the sale and restore title, and the legal process was moving forward, slowly, the way legal processes do. I couldn't go onto the property. I drove to the public's access point at the cove's far end, parked my car, and walked to the water's edge. The lake was lower than I remembered, the January drought having pulled the water line back from the bank. The cedar trees were winter gray and sharp-smelling. A heron, actual and unhurried, was working the shallows 30 yards north, picking its way with total focus through the shallow water, lifting each foot with deliberate precision. I stood there for a while. The cold came off the water and settled around me. I thought about a 6-year-old girl reorganizing a tackle box at 5:30 in the morning, and a woman with hands like warm geography pouring vanilla-laced milk into a blue enamel cup with a chip on the rim. Now we wait, Natalie Bird. Now we watch. I waited. I watched. The heron caught something, flipped it once, swallowed. I walked back to my car and drove home. It is 9 months since the hearing now. The title restitution on the lake house is complete. It is mine, legally and fully, recorded at Travis County and closed. I am not living there yet. I drove out last week and stood on the warped dock, testing the boards, and discovered that it needs more work than I have time for right now. I made a list. I documented what needs doing. That's how I do things. I am still with the Army. I was promoted to Major in July, which happened to fall on the same day the final restitution wire arrived in my account. I do not think there is a lesson in that, but it is a fact I enjoy having. My apartment on Riverside Drive has a second room now, furnished properly, with a small bookshelf I built myself on a Sunday afternoon with a drill and 6 hours and a very clear set of instructions. On the kitchen windowsill, in the spot where the morning light hits it first, I keep a small glass bottle of vanilla extract. It is apparently possible to feel gratitude and grief for exactly the same thing at exactly the same time. I know this now. I have been learning it for 9 months, and I expect to keep learning it for a long time. If you're watching this, I want to ask you something, not about family, about documentation. Did you trust someone to tell the truth about what happened, and they didn't? There is a specific kind of helplessness in being absent when the record gets written. Physically absent or just absent from the rooms where the decisions are made. A deployment, a hospital bed, a busy season at work, a decade of just trusting that the people who said they loved you would not use your absence against you. And then you discover what they wrote in your place, and you discover that everyone else read it and believed it, and you are standing in a parking lot with red clay on your boots, wondering how you prove what didn't happen. Here is what I want to tell you. Documentation is not distrust. Keeping records of your own life is not paranoia. Writing things down, saving messages, noting dates and times and what was said, that is not the behavior of someone who expects to be betrayed. That is the behavior of someone who knows their own story has value and intends to be able to tell it accurately. My grandmother understood this. She understood it better than anyone I have ever met. She could not stop what my father was going to do, but she spent 8 years making sure that when it happened, the truth would have somewhere to stand. She was not wrong. Today is a Thursday in October. The morning light through my kitchen window is the specific amber color it gets in fall, when the angle changes and everything looks both further away and more exact. My coffee is brewing. The vanilla bottle catches the light. I have a list on the counter: dock repairs, lumber measurements, a hardware store on the south side of the lake I found online that carries the right gauge screws for the bracket work. Somewhere under all of it, under the list and the promotion, and the slow legal machinery and the long complicated silences with my mother, There is still a 6-year-old girl on a warped dock at 5:30 a.m., wrapped in a quilt, holding a blue enamel cup. She is paying attention, she is learning to wait. She knows that the herons come if you're quiet enough, and that the morning arrives on its own schedule, and that the people who document things are the ones who can prove what happened. She is doing fine. If you have ever been erased from a story that was yours to begin with, had your name used without your knowledge, had your absence turned into permission, type, "I was there" in the comments. Or if you've been the one who kept records, who held on to the receipts, who documented quietly and waited for the right moment, type, "I kept the evidence." Both of those things take a kind of courage that doesn't get enough credit. Both are valid. Both matter. If this story meant something to you, check the description for more stories just like this one. Thank you for being here.